So if you guys have downloaded the Creative Cloud already, you should have an icon that looks like this, right? All right. I'll double click on this, and if I open it, you'll see something like this. Do any of you guys play video games on the computer? No? Okay. Well, I was going to make kind of like a reference to, how this relates, but never mind. Okay, so this is just like essentially your Creative Cloud desktop hub. This is where you access all your other programs that you have. Since I open it up, I am using my St. Charles EDU. And whenever I first click on it, it has this little tab that says All Apps. It's on my desktop. And then I have installed under here. So I have Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Animate, Media Encoder, and Camera Raw all installed. Now, if I scroll down, I have this other little tab or other little section called Available in Your Subscription. And then I have all these other programs, Lightroom, XD, Acrobat, and so forth, Dreamweaver, Character Animator. This one's pretty new. I haven't played around with this. It looks kind of cool, though. It looks like it's based around more just character animation for kind of animations. Anyways, so these are all the programs that are available in your subscription through St. Charles. You guys should have the same thing. It should be all encompassing. So you should have access to all the Adobe programs. If you haven't downloaded all these yet, the main ones we will be using in this class are After Effects, Animate, and Media Encoder. So you want to, if you have not, go through here and download those three. Do any of you guys not have this Adobe Creative Cloud icon? Does everyone have that? Anyone not have it? Okay, cool. So then, are all of you guys comfortable with like loading up Animate and After Effects and all this stuff? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, anyways, what I'll do just to be safe is kind of go over that real quick. There we go. So you'll just Creative Cloud and you can sign in. So when you sign in, you want to use your St. Charles EDU info. And I'll skip continue. So whenever you do that, it'll say, hey, welcome back, blah, blah, blah. From here, what you can do is, manage your account or open Creative Cloud. Now, because I've already downloaded all this stuff, what I have might be a little bit different than what you guys have. But if you create on maybe Creative Cloud, let's see, I might be doing this all in circles. Okay. So let's see. I clicked on Creative Cloud and it'll take you to this kind of setup where you can kind of see your own little dashboard up in the top right. And you can install Creative Cloud app, which is this thing right here. And once you do that, you can use the app to install whatever programs you want, or you can just install them straight from the website. So I have Photoshop, it highlights, and I can get app. I already have it. You can also highlight these and get app as well. I think maybe it's telling me to get app because I don't have the latest updates, but that's okay. Yeah, so this is where you'll essentially download anything you need. If you guys, have trouble with any of this stuff, just let me know and I can kind of give you guidance, one-on-one, and that might be maybe better than me just trying to fumble around in here. So what I'll do is open this up again. And from here, I can open these programs, but I also have them in my little dash panel down here. So what I'm going to do is just start opening Animate. So I'll click on this. Any questions on like downloading any programs, like any apps or anything like that? Like what I kind of but didn't really cover just now? No questions? Okay. As I said, if you guys get in the middle of this and find that you're having trouble, just shoot me a text or something. I'll try to help you out as much as possible. All right. So this might look familiar, this kind of screen or this kind of layout. This is Animate. It might look pretty familiar to maybe Illustrator, Photoshop, Premiere, anything else that you've worked on in Adobe. What I'm going to do is create new, or I mean, you can select from these like start a new file fast. You can start from some of these presets. You can also go down here and do some of their tutorials. You can say, check out what's new. And you can click on this learning tab up here, and it'll give you some little demos, and it will open them up in the app as well. So, and it shows you how long they are. If you want to kind of dig into some of this stuff, feel free to, check out some of these little tutorials and things. They're really great for getting started. But what I'm going to do is create new. And then similar to probably what you've seen before, you'll get a little kind of preset screen with your settings and things like that. So I'm going to stick to full HD 1920 by 1080, and you'll see that my details are right here on the right. Now, I have inserted 24 frames per second before, so it kind of defaults to that. But if I hover over 4K standard HD, it gives me a frame rate of 30. So the frame rate just means FPS, or frames per second. So if I hit full HD, I'm going to keep it to 24 frames per second. And what that means is every 1 second, I have 24 frames showing up, which means there are 24 images showing in each second of animation. And that's what I want. 24 frames per second is usually the standard for traditional animation. And 12 frames per second is usually the second standard. But usually when you're setting up a project like this, you'll set it for 24 frames per second, and you'll do something called animating on twos, which I'll cover that a little bit further. Platform type, just keep it by default, ActionScript 3.0 or HTML5. Just keep it ActionScript. And create. So then you should get a window or a screen that looks like this. Now, this is where kind of some of the similarities between After Effects or Illustrator or Photoshop, all that stuff kind of differ. Because, well, maybe for Premiere, you have a timeline down here, you have a timeline in Animate, you also have a timeline in After Effects. But what I want to show you guys, let's see, pull this down a little bit. Just like Photoshop, there's several different types of windows and things and like layouts that you can kind of switch around. If I go up to my window right here, I can go to extensions and change this stuff. I can add different assets or different things like that. Just like Photoshop, just like Illustrator, I can hit this edit bar so you can tell what is already in here and selected. And if I hit edit bar to turn it off, then I don't have it. And I can come back up here, and turn it back on. Same thing with tools. I get rid of my tools, and I can turn them back on. So what I'll do is just kind of go over some of these main tabs and windows, and then I'll start drawing some stuff. So to the right or to the far left, this should look pretty familiar. It's your tools bar, and most of these tools are pretty much the same thing from Illustrator and Photoshop. You have your selection tool, and you also notice that the shortcuts are the same as well. So the selection tool is V for the shortcut, and that's the same as Illustrator and Photoshop. And if you look at some of these tools, you notice that some of them have like a little white arrow in the bottom right corner. And that means if you click and hold left click, you'll get this kind of sub menu of different tools that you can use. And this little white arrow tool is your sub selection tool. I think in Premiere or Illustrator, it's called your direct select tool, but the shortcut is still the same, A. So if you know shortcuts from Photoshop and Illustrator, you're already ahead of the game. This is your free transform tool. Hover over that. You have a gradient transform tool. Free transform just helps you move objects and items. Your lasso tool, polygon tool, magic wand. Again, a lot of the stuff should look familiar. Fluid brush, your classic brush, an eraser, a shape tool, which you can make rectangles, ovals, polystar shapes, different things like that. And then your line tool. And we also have a pen and adding, deleting anchor points, convert anchor point tool, blah, blah, blah. Text, paint bucket, which fills colors, your eyedropper, your asset warp tool, which we'll cover a little bit later. And then you have your hand and your zoom tool, which you look at these, the shortcuts are still the same as well. So one of the biggest things as far as shortcuts go that I would recommend kind of getting comfortable with and kind of familiarizing yourself with early on is Z and the spacebar. So Z is my zoom tool. Now, unlike Illustrator and Photoshop, you can't click and drag left and right to kind of zoom in. You just have to tap your left click. But if I hold down Alt, which is Option on Mac, you'll see that my icon turns from a plus to a minus and back there again. So that, if you can imagine, increases or decreases your zoom. So I want to zoom out so I can see my whole scene. So I hold down Alt and click when it's negative, and I can zoom out. And then I can also zoom in several times, and I'll zoom out a few times more. And now the next tool that I want you guys to really try to familiarize yourself with is holding spacebar. If I hold spacebar, you'll notice that my icon turns into a hand. So this is a lot quicker than just tapping H, and I can do this from any tool. And whatever tool I have, so I hit V, and I have my selection tool now. If I hit spacebar again, I'm still going to get this hand. And what this allows me to do is grab and just slide my cursor around or slide the space around. Now, this is a really easy and fast way for moving around your image. And let's say I want to zoom in on something, and then I can move over, zoom in a little bit more, move around, hit Alt and zoom out, and then spacebar. So learning that and kind of registering that into your tool of like quick access buttons and your own kind of personal, process makes things a lot easier. All right, so let's say I grab my brush, I'll pick my color. This should look all really familiar. And I'm going to draw something. There we go. Neat. All right, if I look over here on the right side, for some reason my library is highlighted. There's nothing in there yet. But if you tab over, or if you go over to the next tab, Properties, then you'll see something. This should look familiar. It's not the exact kind of carbon copy from Illustrator or Photoshop, but it is your properties for whatever tool you have selected. So I have my brush selected, and this is giving me my brush tools. So here's where I change my brush size. And if you look in the middle of my scene, it's showing you about how large that is going to be. All right, and if I click on this little circle, I mean, these are my brush options anyways. I can choose different brushes, not many out the gate. You can also create a new brush and increase the angle and the flatness. Oh yeah, that looks great. I love it. And then I can also drop down the size. So, Control Z, and I'm just going to delete some of this stuff. And I'm a traditionalist. I'll keep it a regular old circle. Edit custom brush shape. So you can kind of go back there and change whatever you changed. Minimum size. So the minimum size deals with pressure, and particularly when you are using like a tablet or like a bamboo pad or some sort of drawing pad. For this, I'm not even going to fool with it. I'm just going to leave it at 0. And for smoothing, that deals with, I mean, if you notice, whenever I'm drawing, the edge, if you look at the edge of my lines, they do look kind of almost a little pixelated and a little sharp and jagged. But when I let go, you'll see that they kind of smooth out a little bit. Now, that is because, like Illustrator, Animate is a vector-based kind of art program. So anything that you draw in here is going to be vector-based, which means at any resolution, at any size, it's going to keep its crispness and its size and its scale, and not lose any kind of quality of image. So if I select my selection tool, I can drag this around. If I right-click, I can transform and free transform, and then I can scale it down. And if I hold Shift, it locks it into scale. And then I hit Enter, or well, just click off of it, and it still maintains the same kind of quality. If I extend it out, it's still kind of sharp and crisp for the most part. All right. So then, yeah, since I have my selection tool, well, my free transform tool selected now, you see that I have different kind of options. And my selection tool over here, oh, yeah, property. Okay, so another thing you can do is whenever you're using your brush to draw, let's say I want to kind of change some things in here. What you can do is, well, you can select on this, and you'll notice that whenever I select on an object, it has this kind of like dotted line or dots all over it just to let you know that it's selected. And what else you can do, if I click off of it and hover to the edge, you'll notice that under my mouse or under my cursor, I'm getting like this right angle and then this kind of curved angle. And the curved angle has more to do with just like line segments, whereas the straight like 90-degree is more about points on your object. So if I grab that and click and hold, I can pull out different sections of my object. So you'll notice this is when I grabbed from a curved point. This is when I grab from like a 90-degree point, like this. See, 90 degrees, curved. And so now I'm taking more of a line segment, whereas, let's see, there we go. Here, I'm going to grab a point, and you can see it kind of highlights now. And I'm dragging that point out. And I can kind of merge them with other different points or along different lines or things like that. Now, whenever you're painting, this is just, regular painting. I'll delete that and this. I'll go back to my brush. And let's say I want to paint something different. There you go. Look at that beautiful face. Now, let's say I want to keep this, but whenever I want to start animating it, I don't want to have to just drag that. I want to drag everything and move it together. Now, if you notice, if I can drag and drop like this and select different areas with the selection tool. But if I hover over just half of something, I'm only going to select that part. Unlike Photoshop, it doesn't select everything. So if I start moving it, it's going to be pulled apart. So what you can do, let's say I want to keep this as one whole object so that if I click on one thing, I can move it all together. What you'll do is select everything, right click, and you'll go down to convert to symbol. And then I'll just say face 1 and type. I think it defaults to movie clip, but I'm going to turn it to graphic. I'm going to hit OK. So now you'll notice that instead of it being kind of like dots when selected, if I click on it, it puts this kind of blue box around everything. And now I can drag this freely. I can kind of scale it around. If I go to transform, free transform, there we go. Same way I can do all that other stuff. Really. And if I go back up to my library up here in this right side, I now have face 1 in my list of library items. So this is a symbol. So I can drag this and drop it into my scene, and now I have 2 symbols in here. So you'll need to know this because, and then I can delete these and just drag it in here a bunch of times, all the faces. Now let's say I want to color it green. Can I do that? No, I can't do that. Let's say I do want to change this to the color green. What I'll do is right click and then let's see. Convert to bitmap. I think. Maybe not. Might need to break it apart. There you go. So if you break apart, then let's see. You can, so long as it's highlighted, you can kind of change the colors and alter it in any kind of way you need. And if I hit my erase button, maybe I'll take a little piece out of his ear. There you go. Got his ear bit off by Mike Tyson. Nothing? Okay. Well, whatever. So that's kind of just working in here really generally. I'm going to delete all this stuff. So next thing I want to talk about is this timeline down here. So as you can imagine, this kind of relates to the timing or our time frame. So one of the first things you'll see over here, kind of to the left side, is my layer 1. Now, similar to Photoshop, if you click on this box right here that says new layer, you're going to create a new layer. You can create several layers. And just like Photoshop and Illustrator, let's see, pull that up a little bit more. I can create a folder. And as by default, it doesn't have anything in it. But if I click on these, so what I did was just click on here, shift click on this one, and I select all of them. And remember that you can hit one, hold Control or Command on Mac and select multiple. But I can take these, drag them up, and you'll see how if I have it above this folder, the little dot goes to the far left. If I have it under the folder, the dot kind of is past the folder. So that means they're nested under there. If I let go, now you'll see that these are indented where this one is not. They are part of my folder. So let's say I want to undo that. What I'll do is just shift click, drag them up here, and then I can just delete that. So if I hit delete, it's not going to do anything, but if you just hit this trash can, you'll get rid of that. So that should be pretty familiar. These icons will be pretty familiar as well. Locking in a layer or turning off visibility. Locking something means you can't adjust it or alter it. Turning off the visibility means you just can't see it in your scene. And then this button is just highlighting stuff. So if you click on that, you can highlight this layer so that if you scroll down here, way far down, you'll still see, oh, that's the layer that I'm working on. Now, with only 4 layers, it doesn't make a difference, but a lot of times, you can get into Animate and have, 60 different layers, all of different things, all with kind of a section here, a section there, and just kind of scattered all over the place. It can be a real mess. And these are just the colors of them. That is your show all layers as outlined. So I'll just give you an example of that. There you go. See? There we go. So then if I hit this, it just shows them as an outline. And you'll notice that whenever I do this, it outlines them as this kind of purple, pinkish, magenta color, the same as my layer right here. If I double click on this, I get this option. And I can change my outline color to anything else. Change it to blue. And then you'll notice that this turns blue, and then my lines turn blue. Okay. So moving on with the timeline. Now, you'll notice, all right, so one thing, if I drag on this little playhead, which if you've worked in Premiere or any kind of video program before, this probably looks familiar. I can't actually slide this down. Like I'm clicking and I'm dragging, but it's not going past these markers right here. And what these are, these little squares with circles in them, are keyframes. Now, you might notice that this one right here is a little bit lighter, like lighter gray, and it has a black dot, whereas these are kind of a darker gray with a hollow dot or a gray dot on the inside. That means, well, both of these are something called a keyframe. One is an empty keyframe, these 3 right here. One is a full keyframe or a regular keyframe. So that means I have drawings in here. If I select on this keyframe, it will highlight everything in it, and you can tell because they're all kind of dotted. And if I hit delete, it will delete everything in there and turn this keyframe from more whitish with a black dot to gray with a hollow dot. So one of the first things you're going to learn and kind of figure out about working in Animate is keyframing. And that is going to be one of the quintessential, most crucial kind of concepts of animation in general. So the way you add more keyframes is by clicking on this little button right here, which says Insert Keyframe. By default, it should look like this white square with a black circle in it. But if I click and hold I'll get a blank keyframe and a frame. You also have this auto keyframe, but we're not going to worry about that yet. These are the three types of frames that you will see: a keyframe, blank keyframe, and a frame. So if I leave it at keyframe, if I click, oh, well, automatically added it in there. So I'm just going to keep adding this in, keep tapping a bunch of keyframes. Now, what that did, and you'll notice that below it, because I didn't have these all selected, it just added blank frames in here. And now you can see that I can scrub freely. So you can only scrub up to where you have a keyframe, even if it's just a blank keyframe. This blank space right here is not accounted for. Whenever you export a project, it will by default stop your video at the very last keyframe. Now, let's say, there you go. And I'll show you guys that again in a second. Let's say that I have, I have one layer that goes all the way out to frame 19. And then the rest only go up to like 5 and 7. And another kind of key feature is right up here, it has 19F. That just shows what frame I'm on. If I scrub through here, it'll show me exactly. Sometimes it's kind of hard. Is this 10 or is this 10? You know, you can look right up here. And this little icon right here, it's kind of grayed out. This is my FPS, or my frames per second, or my rate. It has 24. And that's how you can always know, what speed essentially you are at. So you'll also notice that, I have gray kind of square spaces every 5 frames, and those just denote, every 5th frame. And if you look up at the top above all of this, I have my 1S right here on frame 24, and that just means that at this point, it has been 1 second. But anyways, what I was getting at, whenever you export a video, or whenever you're getting ready to finish up and export your video, by default, Animate will only will stop your video right at the very last frame, the furthest frame out. So here, let's say I animate, but I'm only animating the first 7 frames. But because layer 3 goes all the way out to frame 24, it's going to animate to frame 24. To do that, to fix that, you can either delete these frames, and then you're only going to go out to frame 7, or you can note that whenever you're in your export settings. And I'll show that a little bit later. So if I go back up here and if I click a couple of these frames, you'll see that it extends these out with just blank keyframes. And I want to show you the significance of that. So if I go over to layer 3, and let's take my brush, and I'll just draw a red circle. Then you'll see that this fills out all white. And because I only have one dot here, so I only have one keyframe, the rest of these are just blank frames, it just extends this drawing out for however many frames I have extended. Now, if I go up here and continue to hit keyframes, it's going to keep continuing to have that out, or extend that out. So let's say, all right, well, for layer 4, I'm going to draw something here. And I'll make it a bluish to match my highlight. Now, if I go to my next frame, it's not going to be there. And I'm just going to keep adding dots in. Now, as you can see, it's kind of a pain to kind of click on something and then have to go back and click on the next keyframe. One shortcut is going to be your comma and your period. And it's right above your Alt on PC or your Option on a Mac to the left or to the right of your spacebar. So your period and your comma, if you click your comma, which is going to be the one on the left, you scrub to your next keyframe on the left, and your period takes you to the next keyframe on the right. So this is an easy way to kind of scrub through all this stuff while you're using your mouse. And you can kind of get an idea of what this animation is going to look like. So this is working with kind of blank keyframes. Now, let's say I'm going to go all the way to my last keyframe right now, and I'm going to put a dot right here. You'll notice that this hollows out, or this goes from hollow to kind of gray with white, or whitish gray with a black dot. Now, if I hit insert keyframe, you notice that it's keeping that same keyframe in the exact same spot. So now I've got this dot, like each one of these keyframes is the same dot in the same position. Very similar to how this extends out the same object in the same position here. Now there is a difference. If I go in this marker, I'm going to hit my selection tool, and if I drag this circle, remember this is not a keyframe where I am. I'm on frame 11, but this is not a keyframe. So if I drag and drop this, what it will do is it will move, and you'll see that it highlights this whole bar. So it just shows me that, hey, you move this object, we're going to move it not just for this one frame, but for this whole extended keyframe. So if I scrub through here, now my red circle is not over on the left and moving at frame 11, it's staying in this one spot. So what this means, this blank space right here, is you're just extending this frame. Now, for what I did right here in this highlighted area, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not extending a frame. I'm just adding about 10 of the same exact frame. But if I go through here, and let's say at frame 16, I want this ball to move, I can do that. And now, if I look at it, it moves in that one frame and goes back. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So now let's say, oh crap, I didn't actually want to move that. Well, I mean, you can always Control Z and bring it back, but you'll have to go back a few steps. Or what you can do is, let's say, all right, well, I want to animate this and I want it to start maybe here. If my next frame, I'll put it over here. And I just kind of want it to animate and look like it's moving through space. The easiest way to probably do this is to say, all right, well, I'm going to start from this point, add a new keyframe, drag it, add a new keyframe, and drag it. Right? That's a pretty easy way to start getting some movement. Another way you can do that, and if you want to see exactly where your spot was before, is you hover over this little option, these two little circles, and it's called onion skin. Click on that. Then I get something called onion skinning. And if you look over here, kind of near my playhead, I have this highlighted section in the frame counter. Now what this does, and if I scroll over right here, you can see it a little bit better. And if I can drag these little lines, I have a blue line and a green line by default. If I scrub them in or bring them in a little bit, there we go. I can start seeing where my previous frame was and where my future frame is. And that's denoted by the color of these lines. So my back frame is always going to be this blue color, which is this blue. And my forward frame is always going to be this green color. Now, this is the frame that I'm on now, and it's highlighted, and I can tell it's highlighted because I have this like dot pattern on here. And let's say, all right, well, this is great. It shows me one frame before, but if I want to see 2 frames prior, what I can do is go to this little blue bar and drag it out one more frame, and you'll notice that I get one more image. And this image looks a little bit lighter. And I can do the same thing with my green. And so this becomes a little lighter as well. So I extend these out. And now I can see, and it's a little confusing now just because of the way I have it set up, but I can extend this as far or as short out as I want to. And this helps you get an idea of where your keyframes are and in relation to each other. And the closer they are to the actual object, the brighter they will be. So this is a brighter blue. So it's the one frame before, and the frame before that, 2 frames from where I am now, is still a little bit lighter. So this is a great way to kind of get an idea of exactly how your animation is looking. And if I kind of scrub through this, I get some weird things. But onion skinning is a really great tool, especially when you're doing hand animation and like more traditional animation where you're doing frame by frame stuff. Excuse me. All right, and you can also do all frames, anchor markers, and advanced settings. Just do selected range for now. That's more than enough for what you'll need. And I can just turn this off. All right, so let's say I want to play through this and just see what it looks like. You can just hit this play button right here, you'll see that it says enter for the shortcut. All right, some blue balls moving around a screen. There you go. If I want it to loop, I can just hit this, and then you'll get this little blue bar up here, and it'll show you how much will loop. So by default, it's just that, but I can extend this out just the same way I did with the onion skinning. So we start getting this. All right. Now, let's say this feels a little bit fast. If I want to slow it down, one thing I can do, and one thing that I mentioned earlier was this idea of animating on twos. So as of now, when I have one frame after the other like this is animating on ones, which means every one frame is a new keyframe. Now let's say I'm going to go here and hit on frame, and if I select this keyframe and hit that frame button, it will extend out a blank frame, which remember, it's just going to extend out the image or the I have for 2 frames now. I'd click here and I'll do the same thing. So remember to use your shortcuts. Oops. And actually that's a good note. If my playhead is on frame 7, but I select this frame like that. Well, if I use my shortcuts to move over here. So I want to create a blank frame for this one, but if I hit this button, because I have this selected, it will extend out a frame right here. I don't want to do that. So just make sure that you're on the right place. This is the by hand way to do it. So now, if I play through here, this section will look a lot slower than it did. So this is something called animating on twos. That means that every image lasts 2 frames. Now, to do a little bit of math, because I'm at 12 frames per second, or 24 frames per second, excuse me, when I'm animating on twos, this is actually more along the lines of animating at 12 frames per second. Does that make sense? This is what you'll see in a lot of traditional kind of like, especially Disney animation, but a lot of like basic cartoons animate at 12 frames per second, which is usually done this way. And by doing it, animating on twos at 24 frames per second, you have the freedom to go back and animate on ones if there's something really detail oriented that you need to do. Whereas if you have this set to 12 frames per second, the fastest you can do anything is 12 frames per second and not 24 frames per second. It just allows you to have that option in case you ever want to do it. Which again, this is kind of, into the weeds a little bit, but just stuff good to know for now. All right, so this is kind of, layer 4 will be just kind of some regular hand animating, frame by frame type stuff. Within Animate, though, there are a couple different options for shape for something called tweens. And I'll show you an example of what that means. So I'm going to this layer with my red circle. Again, if I click on that, I can highlight it. And remember, this is just one frame extended out the whole way. What I'll do is I'll click on that keyframe and right click, and I will create a classic tween. The selected frame cannot be tweened. Need to convert frame content to a symbol in order to tween. Do you want to convert and create a tween? So I'm hitting OK. And you'll notice, if watch right here in my library, this object will turn from a painting to a shape. And there we go. So I have just like tween one. Click on it. It's just the name of my object. I can kind of come in here and change the name. There we go. And so when I do that, it creates this kind of purple bar with a dotted line on it. So if I go, let's say, to frame 7, I can grab my object and move it over here. And then you'll notice that down here, this line has been created. And a keyframe has been created right here where I selected it. So what that means is, and now if I scrub through here, I'm getting this motion. So I haven't animated anything. All I did was create an object, turned it into a shape or a symbol, excuse me, and then right click, go up to Classic Tween. Now if I click Remove Classic Tween, then it will empty this out and it will just put it right here. So that at frame 7, it just kind of appears over there. But this is still like classic tween, so I can click over here, drag it, click over here and drag it. And now I've got this thing moving around. And I can go back in here and create a classic tween again. And so now it will move straight across. Now, one thing you'll notice is the shorter distance here in your timeline, the quicker something's going to happen. And the longer distance something's covering in a short amount of time, the faster it's going to move. Now, saying that maybe isn't as clear as illustrating it, so I'll try and illustrate it again. So now what I'm going to do is grab a square, and maybe I don't want it blue. We'll do a green square. There we go. So I'm in layer 1. And let's see. There we go. I don't want an outline for that. Okay. I will create a motion tween now. And again, I have to make this simple. I'm going to cancel and just show you the process. So I right click and convert to symbol down here. The shortcut's F8. And then I'll just say green square. And again, I'm starting to get these things filling up in my library. So what I'll do now is right click and create motion tween. And now, so instead of, a purple bar, I see this yellow kind of goldish bar. And it works a very similar way as the classic tween, except what I can do is click over here, let's say frame 9, drag this over. And now, instead of the classic tween where I just have the objects in different places, I get this line right here. And because, my layer is teal, it shows up as teal. I'm actually going to change that color to make it a little easier to see. We'll do black. There we go. So, and you'll notice too that unlike the motion or the classic tween, I don't have this line right here. It's just empty space between here and my 2 keyframes. But if I click on a particular frame, it will show me where that object is going to be at that time. And these dots correspond to each frame in your timeline. So this is frame 1, frame 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I should be 6 highlighted. Yep. Now what I can do here is I can adjust my line. There you go. So if I select off of it, if I kind of highlight this line or kind of scroll over it, you'll see, just like whenever I want to alter a shape that I've hand drawn, I get this little curve underneath my cursor. So if I click and drag, click and hold, I can drag this line, and now I'm getting a curve. And if you notice, some of these dots start getting really bunched up close together right here, and they become further apart right here. If I drag this again, now I'm getting a lot of dots close right here, and as they get to this side, they get further and further apart. You guys have any idea what might mean as far as, speed of movement?
I would assume the closer the dot, the faster it's going to go.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay. Let's see. I'll show you. So we'll play through here. And actually, maybe that's not quite enough time to illustrate it. I'll move it around a little bit more. There you go. You can really kind of get in the weeds with this kind of stuff. Let's see. So for some reason, oh, no wonder. There we go. So it's actually kind of the opposite, Brian. Whenever we have frames, and I've kind of moved it around over here now. Whenever we have frames really close together, they're covering a short amount of distance over those frames. So there tend to be, and let me try and undo all this just so I can get back to where I was. All right, there we go. So right here, when we have all these frames kind of close together, they're covering a short amount of distance. So they're actually moving really slow because remember, between each one of these dots is the same amount of time. It's 1/24th of a second because we have 12 frames per second. So let's say right over here, this amount of time to cover the distance between this dot and this dot is the same amount of time as covering between this dot and this dot. Now, I know this is maybe kind of confusing or maybe a little unrelated or doesn't seem important right now, and it's not that important right now, but it is something you'll want to know later for having like smooth animations. So looking at this, I can tell because this starts off really slow, because these start off really close together, it's going to start off slow. And then as it gets between maybe this frame and this gap starts to widen. And that means it's going to have to cover more distance in that same amount of time. So it's going to speed up right here. What I can do is drag this dot all the way over and really kind of accentuate those curves. So you can kind of play with this stuff and see what works best. We'll see what that looks like. So I'll put my loop on for about that many frames. We'll play it. You'll see, I know there's some other kind of distracting stuff going on. There we go. So this is another way of kind of telling motion. You can tell it kind of slows out right here. And this is something called slowing out. And this would be, well, not slowing in. But these are kind of more concepts we'll cover on maybe later next week. But anyways, the whole point of this was just showing you guys another kind of tween. So if I hover over here too, I can drag my square, and now I have this other motion path. And I can kind of adjust these, and you'll get some weird kind of funky things going on. But just play around with this and move it in different places. And so now I've got this motion path. So this is the motion tween. And you can go in here and refine it and kind of clean it up and different things. Here are your curves, and we'll cover this a little bit later too. But these correspond to each one of your points in here. And so you can grab these points and kind of curve them out and play around with them a little bit. You get these Bezier handles similar to the pen tool. But I'm not expecting you guys to really play around with this too much. You don't need to do all that. Just drop this down. So I'm going to right click and turn off Refine Motion Tween. There we go. There's one more tween I want to show you guys. And then I'll show you how to export and we'll be done for the day. All right, I'm going to turn this off. One more thing. So let's say I make another shape and I'm going to make a yellow circle. Here's my yellow circle. All right, so it highlights in. So what I'm going to do is right click and create shape tween. Now the shape tween only works when you're making actual shapes. So, I get this option to create a shape tween and it does this. But if I right click, if I hit my brush tool and just make some mass, and then right click and create shape tween. Well, actually, I guess maybe it will work. What I'll do is select a different frame. You'll see now that I can't use my brush. So there's no current frame to draw into. Also check that the current frame is not an interpolated frame. So I can't use my brush at all. What I can do is go in and I should be able to use my tool. Oh, what the heck? Ah, here we go. I'll delete that. Well, anyways, here, let me restart this. I'll remove my shape tween, delete this, and create a shape. Oh, I was going to use a circle, wasn't I? There we go. Now if I create my shape tween, go out over here. Man, I was You know, I was having trouble with this yesterday. Let me see. Bear with me here. I'm running into some issues. Hmm. Rats. Well, I'll have to get back to you guys on the shape tween. Let me see. Oh, right. Okay. So you have to insert a blank keyframe. That's the secret. So now I'll draw another shape here. So, all right, let me just completely restart. All right, so shape tweens. What you'll do is you'll create a shape. You won't be using symbols for this. So I'm going to start with a yellow circle. And then you'll see it opens up my keyframe. I'm going to right click, create shape tween. And then, further down the line, let's say at frame 10, I'm going to right click and insert blank keyframe. But I can also go here, and I know this is a blank keyframe by the hollow circle. So I'm going to click on that. And now my shape should disappear. And what I will do is create a rectangle, and I'll put it over here. And so now, once I create that second shape, you'll see that this line adjusts appropriately. So now if I scrub through here, I'm going from a circle over to a square. Now you can also do that with colors as well. So if I create another blank keyframe here, let's say I want a, we'll go with greenish poly shape polygon. I go to my properties, let's see, you can click on style and you only have polygon and star, but so now I'm getting these kind of different shapes changing. Go over here, again, create a new keyframe, and I'm going to make maybe a purplish star. So these are kind of your shape tweens. And, for, traditional animating, character animating, or something you see in a cartoon, you probably won't see much of these shape tweens like this, but for what you guys will be doing today or doing this week, you play around with that. Try some of the tweens out. Any question on any of that stuff so far? Oh, I had a hiccup just now, but okay. I know this is a lot of info, and I am recording this session, but this is all also covered in the video that I recorded. Recorded it yesterday, but it's up on the week 1 module. So let's say, I'm pleased with the way all this looks. It's a lot of stuff moving around. This is about what I want you guys to do. I want you to add more on here, play around a lot more than just like, 4 little things. But I'd really encourage you guys to play around with some hand drawn animating like this too, like the blue ball bouncing around. So once you've done this and you're satisfied with what you have, you're going to go up to File. First off, you want to save it, and I'll hit Save As. I'm just going to save this to my desktop. As a rule of thumb, you shouldn't save things to your desktop. It's a bad practice, but just for this kind of test example, I'm going to do that. Remember, convention is going to be lowercase first initial, full last name with a capital first letter, And then you're going to do Spring 21, capital SP 21. Let me double check, actually. I don't want to tell you guys a lie. Yeah, okay. Remember, this is what I'm using right here. Oh, well, doesn't matter. Okay. And then the class, art 2106, another underscore, and project 01. Now, this is a Flash document. I'm just saving this file, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. And now I'm going to go to File and Export. So this is going to be how you're exporting all of your videos and films and movies and things that we're working on. For the first half of the semester, we'll be using Animate, so learning this process will be important. So again, File, down to Export, and you want to select Video/Media. Don't want to export a movie, and we aren't going to be exporting GIFs right this minute. We'll maybe do that a little bit later in the semester. But export video and media. You'll click on that. And then you'll get this little export media menu or kind of screen. The render size, 1920 by 1080. That's what I started off. That's what I want to keep. Span entire movie. So whenever you click this, it's just going to go out, like I was saying earlier, to the very final frame, which looks like it's 35, 6, 37. You can select scene. I only have one scene in this project, or you can select frame range. So 1 to 30. So that would stop me right about here. I would want to go to 35, but I'm just going to click entire movie. Or you can choose a time as well, but just keep it your entire movie. All right, the format. I believe H.264 might be default, though I could be mistaken. If it's not, that is the setting that you want, H.264. That is kind of like the universal high quality, low file size format. Preset, just keep it default. AME is what I have selected, just default. And then when you have output, this will tell you exactly where your project is and what its name is. Since I already saved this as an animate file, I have the name already here. But if you want to save it somewhere different or call it something different, just hit this folder. I mean, you can type in this stuff here, but it might be easier to hit this folder. And you could choose exactly where you want to save it. So again, I'm saving it to my desktop, a bad practice, generally speaking, but just for this demo, that's where I'm saving it. And if you click a save as type, you won't get anything here. This is just choosing the destination. I'll hit save. Now, at the very bottom, you'll see this little button or this little checkbox that says Start Adobe Media Encoder Render Queue Immediately. I'm going to uncheck that, and I'll show you why in a second. But if I hit Export, you'll get this little loading bar. And now it doesn't seem like it's going to do anything. You have to wait a few minutes, and especially if you tend to have a computer that runs maybe a little bit slower, this might take a while. What you're doing is opening a whole nother Adobe program, which is Adobe Media Encoder. And this, you guys, make sure you have this downloaded. This is never something you'll just open up and play around in. Media Encoder is used for kind of finalizing renders for your videos or any kind of projects that you have, particularly in relation to Premiere or After Effects or Animate. Because those programs are so hefty in general, rendering from them is usually not, ideal. So Adobe has created Media Encoder, and over the last, 5 or 6 years, they've made it almost necessary to use Media Encoder as opposed to just exporting directly from Animate or After Effects. So, like I said, it might take a while. Surprisingly, it doesn't take me too long on my computer. This is a relatively new computer that I built over the fall, though, so it's meant for kind of running these programs like this. But for you guys, it might take a while. And once Media Encoder is loaded, it might take it even longer for your project to show up in your queue. Now, I'm not going to go over too much of these menus because you really don't need to know them all that much. You'll just need to look up in this top kind of right, and you'll see this queue window. And that's what you want to look for. It should open up by default. And in this queue window, I have this little project right here. And this is, if you kind of look over here, B Fulcher SP21 Art 2106 Project 1. That's my file. So there's 3 things that you want to check, and they're all highlighted in blue for you. First thing is this H.264. Click on that, and this will also give you kind of some of these other options. If you set up H.264 in Animate, you can leave all this as is. I'm just going to cancel. You can hit this drop down too, and it will give you all these other format, but just make sure H.264 is selected. For this, it's match source, high bit rate. Just match source is fine. It should default to that. And then here is just where your file is being saved. If you want to double check, you can click on here, and it will open this up again. And now you can see save as type. And if you drop down, it just says MP4, and that's fine. I'm gonna hit save. All right. So then it says on status ready. So once you're ready, you can highlight this, hit this little play button. Now keep in mind that I think my project was like 35 frames, so that's like less than a second and a half. So this should be really quick. I'll hit play, and then it had the little process bar, and it's done. So it has this little check mark to let me know that it's done and completed without issues. Now I can shut out a media encoder, and then you'll notice that you have this little, hey, it was successfully created tab. Hit OK. I'm going to minimize animate. And this. And now I see that my video is right here, and also that my animate file is here. And I also have this recover file, which if I close out of animate, that recovery file is gone. So here's my original Adobe Animate, and here is my video. And if I double click on this video, it will open and play. Wow, isn't that something? Beautiful. So that is the process of opening up Animate, getting a project started, working in there, playing around with the keyframings, doing tweens, frame by frame and things like that, and exporting your project. So this is what I want you guys to turn in, the MP4. And if I kind of hover over that, you'll see item type MP4 file. That's what I'm looking for. Do not turn in the animate file or animate document. Any questions on any of that so far?